maybe to conclude Dr. Abadi's point, I was fascinated when I heard that one of the most favorite poets that is recited in the camps of Daesh is Al-Mutanabbi. Controversial in his day, said some things which were really considered outlandish, but ironically the kind of poet of choice for Daesh. And he summarizes exactly what Dr. Abadi was just saying, and I will read you the English translation of a verse of his poetry that is read in the extremist camps. Al-Mutanabbi says, "One who holds his own worth too light finds further humiliation easy to bear. For how can a man feel pain from a new wound if he is already dead?" And that, I think, is the narrative of humiliation and grievance. That if you are in the French projects and rejected, and they even fight about the burkini, how much more humiliation do you want to bear? We can show you a better way out. If you are in Raqqa, Syria, and you are being bombed on by Russians and by Assad and by everyone else, how much more can you bleed from a new wound if you are already dead? And so grievance and humiliation becomes the core narrative that I think attracts it. And that's why it defies the idea of, is it poor people who are recruited or is it rich people? And the truth is, any people. Is it men or is it women? And the truth is both. And so I think that what we wanted to do with today was, with Dr. Oda, to give you a sense that unless we are able to think about Islam differently, to read the Quran differently, to understand the relationship between the Quran and the Sunnah, the prophetic traditions, unless we see that differently, we are going to be caught up either on the one hand with dogma that doesn't take us anywhere, or with fury, with extremism that leads to the kind of narratives and destruction that I think that Dr. Abadi was showing you. It was very important for you to see the kind of videos and marvel at it and be shocked at the same time. To see the statistics of their propaganda, to see the sophistication of it. How much technical expertise have they not already recruited to Raqqa and put them at work? And I think the mistake we make is in our own arrogance to believe that they are just in the caves, and to believe that they are a non-entity and that they're not competing for the soul of Islam. And that, I think, must put into perspective our own little battles. Hanafi, Shafi, how do we do witr in Jama'ah and all of these kind of things. And yet, while we are consumed with those issues, the soul of Islam is being appropriated and we are out of the fight. In fact, I sometimes think we distract ourselves in order not to face the reality of what it is that confronts the Ummah, the global Muslim community today. And so we are not here to provide you with one-sentence answers, because this is a problem that has been coming on since the days when the doors of Ijtihad were closed and we were told, stop thinking. We can't do it in one sentence, we can't do it in one day. And so we were very happy when Brother Haider came to Adams and he saw the second workshop, when we were getting down into election and political strategy, not because only we liked Democrats and hated Republicans, but because we understood that unless Muslims locate themselves politically and are active, we may create the conditions where the seduction that you've heard in nasheeds and Quran and imagery and so forth and language, where those things will become more fertile in an America that becomes more intolerant, more exclusive, more hateful, more bigoted, more Islamophobic, more racist. And so I think that it was, for us today, was not only a wake-up call, which I think Dr. Abadi has helped provide you with, but also to show you through Dr. Oda that there is a way in which we can compete. And so we must pay one eye, must look at what is the major enemy within Islam, and the other eye must look more disrespectfully at those who create the conditions of inertia and don't give us a way forward. And so between those two, we must find a middle path that I think allows us to go forward. So we won't solve all the issues that are now burning in your hearts and minds right now. It's a process that I think we want to walk with you as we go forward, inshallah, and with the ummah as a whole. And I think that that's what, for example, the World for All is about. And that's why we, for example, are very excited by the number of women who are here. Because I think that sometimes some of us are so obsessed with our own lives that we barely greet our children. We don't have a language with our teenage sons and daughters. And so it has to change the nature of parenting in Islam. We need present fathers and vigilant mothers. If we are going, this is an assault on the very concept of parenthood. Because imagine, I shudder to think that my son on his computer could be enticed by everything I'm against. But it can be possible because I may be so busy being against it that I am not for something with him. And so I think that that really is the major challenge that I think we face. And so I think that what we need to do, and I just want to give you an outline on how can we use the conceptual tools that Dr. Jasser Oda has, I think, provided us. Just when you don't know an answer, just ask another why. And dig and dig and dig until you get somewhere. But what I'm trying to do is use my South African background to be able to say what is a strategic toolbox for the way forward and how does it resonate with the Maqasid al Syaria. So that's what I'm going to go through, and he predicted that I will quote Ibn al-Qayyim again, and this is just on the screen for you. You've heard it from him before. He said, but just believe in your hearts that Ibn al-Qayyim is making a true and logical point, and don't be seduced by other interpretations which defy your own logic and your own understanding of Islam. Sharia is based on wisdom and achieving people's welfare or good, public good in this life and the afterlife. Sharia is all about justice, mercy, wisdom and good. Any ruling that replaces justice with injustice, mercy with its opposite, common good with mischief, and wisdom with nonsense is a ruling that does not belong to the Sharia, even if it is claimed to be so by some interpretations. If you know when your friends are talking nonsense, if you know when someone is manifestly unjust despite what they say, if you know that someone is being harsh, don't let them claim to be the opposite of that. You know what it is, and something must gnaw at your heart as you go on. And so I just use a very simple things. I think that the coordinates of Islam offer soft power. How can we be called, for example, to the Tawheed, the unity of Allah, and we only cause division and fragmentation? in the name of defending the integration and the unity of Allah. How can we believe that we are in a religion of Islam derived from the word peace, and our image is one of the opposite of violence, when the name of our religion is a giveaway? How can the Prophet be a mercy unto all of humanity, and in the Prophet's name we cause harshness and the opposite of mercy in this world? How could the Quran be revealed with Iqra, read? Allama bil qalam, I've taught you the pen, write. Allama al insana ma lam ya'lam, I teach you that which you do not yet know, research. And everything we do is anti-intellectual. You can't be anti-intellectual when that was the founding verses of the Quran. When the ummah is described as ummatan wasatan, the ummah that is in the middle, how can we be defined by the extremes? When we are khilafatullah fil ard, we are agents, vicegerents of Allah on earth, how can we be victims only? Sometimes we are victims of a crime, but we cannot be encapsulated in victimhood. There's a difference. You were robbed, you're a victim of a crime, but you can't now go around and embrace victimhood as your modus operandi and your modus vivendi. And so, the levels of intent, I'm just doing this because Dr. Oda has spoken about it. There is the primary level, which would be darurat or necessities. The secondary level, hajiyat or needs. And the tertiary level, tahsiniyat or the adornments. So that's the way in which various maqasid are then. My favorite example is that a necessity in life is privacy and dignity. A need in life is shelter, so that you are not exposed. And the adornments, the tahsiniyat, is the architecture or the aesthetics of your shelter. And so if we understand maqasid in that kind of way, we begin to understand how it is that we can move forward. The 6 classical maqasid are in the original terms, are presented as preservations. So the preservation of lineage, your bloodlines, your genetic pool, of aql, of intellect, of honor, of the soul, of religion, and of wealth. Those are the 6 classical maqasid, the fountainheads of everything that we do. Dr. Oda, to quote him in his book that you must all get, he says that all known schools of Islamic law and the vast majority of jurists over the centuries have concurred that ijtihad is necessary because specific scripts, specific ayat, specific verses in the Quran are limited. Meaning Allah could not write there about everything without the Quran being time and context bound. And events are unlimited, meaning that things that happen in life, you can't find a verse for everything. Thus, the fundamental methodology of Islamic law has developed certain mechanisms for dealing with new events. And I think he gave you those mechanisms this morning. I'm just putting a paragraph from his work. And so, for example, if you go back to what I showed you to, those preservations have been subjected, for example, to, since we're here in Redmond, the upgrading of the app. And so Tahir al-Ashur, he says that collective intents precede individual ones. So sometimes, if you're American, you say, no, I like this. I think what Tahir al-Ashur says, the collective precedes the individual. Your need is subject to collective needs. That gives you a sense of hierarchy. Muhammad Ghazali says, justice and freedom must be added to the maqasid. Sheikh Anushi and former President Khatami says democracy is central to justice and freedom. Rashid Rida political and gender reform was crucial, and Sheikh Yusuf Al-Qardawi, that human rights and dignity must come into the contemporary language that we speak about. So they started to upgrade the act. And so, with this upgrade, we started to move from the classical preservations to more contemporary rights. And so lineage, we don't want to trace bloodlines only, we also now want to say the rights of the family. On intellect, not just the preservation of aql, but we must have access to knowledge and information. It must become a right. You can't say, for example, that girls can't go to school. If you move to a rights-based thing. Honor, that at the heart of honor must be dignity and rights. And the soul needs hurriyah, freedom, in order to find its best position in this world, and not just the preservation of your religion, but the freedom and the right to believe for everyone who wants to believe, or maybe even not even believe. And wealth, it can't just be that you have this piece of land and it must be preserved for you. In fact, what we're now saying is that the best wealth that must be preserved is human development. You have the right to certain services and things when you're ill, and things when you're old, and things when you're children. But, for example, if I go back, the family has the rights to, for example, certain things. But the family can't be closed off from other rights, meaning that you can't begin to say so much about the privacy of your, don't interfere in my family, and then you can do honor killings. I think we've had that kind of thing discussed this morning. Knowledge and information. What are the ethics of it? There must be ethical limits to it. Can you clone, for example? So I think honor and dignity, is it just for some that you like and not for others? Or is it a sword that cuts all ways? The freedom to say what you want to, but do you have the freedom for hate speech? To indignify others? Freedom of belief, the question of blasphemy comes in. Human development. But can you take human development and make the growth imperative so strong that it leads to greed and inequality? So I think that it's a conversation that I think we begin to open up in order to understand things better. So I don't want to go through too much of this, but I think what we begin to look at, for example, if we look at the state of the Ummah, I think that the Ummah is, in my view, defined by inertia, meaning we're not going forward and we're not going back, we're just stuck. Because dogma has taken us over and we have been told not to think. So many of us are just in a state of inertia. Then there's cynicism that is coming, postmodernists come and say, no, what's this nonsense about believing? When it doesn't, you've caused so much war. And then, in response to that, we have the nihilism, the destructiveness that we have just seen with Dr. Abadi's videos coming in. That seems to be the three ways in which the Ummah is defined today. In the heartlands of Islam, the Middle East, North Africa, and so forth, I think that there is what I call a triangular conundrum. At the top of the triangle are the restless. People who just want to get on with life, want to be free, want to have the rule of law, don't want arbitrary attacks on them, don't want war, don't want dictatorships. Then we have the unsustainable, the authoritarian state, the surveillance state, the dictators. And then on the other side of the triangle, feeding off the standoff between the restless and the unsustainable or the undesirable, Daesh, just waiting for every vacuum and occupying it, waiting for every grievance and taking it, waiting for every mistake that is made and taking it. So you won't be able, so that's why I'm saying we're not dealing with a single paragraph or a single line that will answer it. It's solving fundamentally our thought patterns, our paradigm, and solving the political and economic and social conundrum in our heartlands, while on the periphery, places like America, South Africa, France, and so forth, we have the alienated, the people that Daesh is calling to, because France says, you can come and work here, but don't bring your religion. Don't bring your identity. Don't bring your culture. Don't bring your language. Don't bring your food. Don't bring your symbols. Then you've got the assimilated. Those who decide, and the core of the word assimilated is to become the same. They said, listen, if you can't beat them, join them. Muhammad becomes Mo. Samaun becomes Sam. And you try to be cool. And so you become the assimilated, the good Muslim. And then, as we chose in South Africa, the integrated. And the heart of the word integrated is integrity. We decided that as Muslims, we want to retain our integrity and identity as Muslims, but we understood that we needed to say to the South African nation, we will strive for your integrity to be a united, safe and secure and prosperous nation, and we will contribute to it. You recognize each other's integrity and you don't give up too much of who you are. So, if I can say, what are the contemporary challenges that pressurizes the Ummah? It is that there is Islamophobia. Dr. Oda spoke about it. In our homelands, it's the politics of order, the dictatorships who present order, not freedom to us. And then the rise of extremism, Daesh, who comes and becomes a further pressure on us, and you don't know any longer what is the chicken and what's the egg. Did this lay this egg, and this egg, that chicken then laid that egg? Or did Islamophobia come and cause the rise of extremism, and the rise of extremism has brought dictators to keep order? I think we need to sort it out, because otherwise we don't know what domino to start collapsing first. I think the best is we must just work on all of them. And that's the capacity of leadership that we require. People who can speak passionately against 1, 2, and 3. There are some who are afraid of that, so they speak of that and they speak of that. There are some who are not sure about that, so they speak about that. Then there are some who speak about that, but the hypocrisy comes through because they can't speak about that. And so, the trick of leadership is to be able to have equal integrity, credibility, and passion around all of them. Otherwise, you'll be caught out. So, where does the Muslim world fit in? You see, when we deal with intelligence things while I was in politics in South Africa and in diplomacy, we try to understand the world by a simple matrix. Low development, high inclusion, low inclusion. And we found that usually when there is a state with high development and high inclusion, you probably have a cohesive state. Things are working fairly well. And many would claim that that's by and large where the US fit in. You can just argue about more or less where the dot will come. And with Trump, the dot on inclusion may probably be right on that border there. But when there's high development, lots of wealth circulating like in the Middle East, but low inclusion, women are not recognized, migrants are not recognized, the other is not recognized. To keep such a system going, you need an authoritarian state. So they don't happen by accident, they happen because you have chosen a particular path. When you have high inclusion, South Africa has the most democratic system you can find, but low development, lots of poverty, you probably have a fragile state. It's always teetering on the brink. And when you have low development and low inclusion, you're probably beginning to look at a failed state. And that's where you're beginning to see the civil wars and the conflicts come, and that's the point at which extremists begin to occupy there. So I just wanted to give you that to begin to understand the world politically, so that we don't just have our emotions with which to respond to it, but we actually begin to understand what are the matrices of the disorders and the orders that we would find. And so at the end of the day, I want to say that this matrix goes right back to the Maqasid that Dr. Oda spoke about. And that's why in the pilot study, Muslim countries by and large failed the Islamicity index based on the Maqasid. And they found themselves here, by and large. And that's why they could put Sweden and Denmark and Norway there. And so it's not alien to Islam, the things that people yearn for. And so the problem sometimes with Muslims is that we are very high on principles. You know, we ethically this, morally that, don't do this, don't do that, this is great. And we are coming on tactics. You can now give us a problem, we can go and fight it out or do something quickly about it. But the thing that connects, that gives integrity between your principles and your tactics is the missing middle. We are low on strategy. So I always say that principles are what beckons in the far distance. Tactics is the ability to see down the road, but strategy is the ability to see around the corner. And so many of us know where we want to go to ultimately. So many of us can see down the road, but very few of us can see around the corner. And so we make decisions and we make moves that doesn't foresee that your opponent can be cleverer around you when you turn the corner. So I think that I want to put to you the idea that the Muslim community, whether majority or minority, has a missing middle. I don't want to spend too much time on that one, but I do want to say, you know, I don't know how many of you have read Sun Tzu, The Art of War. But when I, for example, read Surah Al-Fath, I actually I questioned, why are we so low on strategy? It is as if the Quran condenses into one chapter, ironically called Fath, the victory. Into one chapter, the whole Muslim art of war. Because there was an objective. The Muslims wanted to go on the minor pilgrimage to Mecca. So 2,000 of them, I think, set out with the Prophet, peace be upon him, set out to go on Umrah. They came to Hudaybiyah, and Quraysh came and said, where are you off to? And so, I don't need to tell the whole story, but effectively, the Prophet ﷺ then had to make up, to choose. Do you want to really now get to Makkah for Umrah, or do you eventually want to conquer Makkah? You see, tactically, Sayyidina Umar was saying to him, listen, we can beat them. Let's do it. Whether we beat them in war or whether we die here, we win. The Prophet ﷺ said, no, there's bigger objectives here. So don't mind if they make me not sign Rasulullah, the messenger of God. I'll sign Ibn Abdullah, the son of Abdullah. Don't worry if they don't want Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. Let's just write Bismillah. Don't worry, it's an unfair and unequal trade between hostages and people who come and so forth. We may appear to lose it. So it appeared as if the Prophet ﷺ apparently had to choose between winning the battle at Hudaybiyah, which they believed they could have won, but he chose to win the peace with terms which looked as if they were humiliated in the negotiations. But victory wasn't the simple objective. And ultimately, the Prophet had to decide whether he wanted to defeat the enemy that was right there in front of him down the road, or defeat idolatry in Makkah, which was around the corner. And the Prophet chose all the things that were out of the box. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And so the question we must ask, if that is a kind of diagrammatic summary of a chapter, and Dr. Oda can tell me it's a bad summary later, that I've mangled tafsir and all of those kind of things. But for me, as a person who comes from an anti-apartheid struggle and a political transition and diplomatic service and so forth, this is how I make sense of that, and why I say to the Muslim communities, there is no reason to be unstrategic. Strategy is wajib. There's a whole chapter of the Quran written on it. If I go further, I read Surah Rum, the Roman Empire, and it starts off, Ghulibat Rum. Rome has been vanquished, and speaks about the battle. I mean, it's almost, if Dr. Oda doesn't mind, it's as if Wahi was breaking news. You wonder why a war is just completed between Persia and Rome. Persia defeats Rome, and immediately Wahi comes, revelation comes to the Prophet to say, Rome has been defeated. Not far from here, but don't worry, it will be reversed quite soon, and then the believers will be happy or satisfied. But, and we'll do this as soon as they are done, is done, we can leave. I just want to finish another mangled tafsir. But what it does is, it says, and if we do geopolitical strategy, the two superpowers have been fighting each other for years, Rome and Persia. They fight each other to a standstill. Persia gets a victory. Both armies have to go back to base because their money's up, their weapons are outdated, their soldiers need to be replenished. And so what does this create? It creates, in political terms, an interregnum, a pause in history, a moment of transition, when the two superpowers cannot come together to crush an emerging community of believers in Makkah. So, the Prophet goes back to Makkah, and suddenly they say, listen, absorb all this punishment we're getting here in Makkah, be resilient. He then reaches out and goes first to Taif to look for alliances and coalitions, and the people of Taif reject him. He then strikes it lucky, gets to Medina or Yathrib. Aus and Khazraj said, listen, we need you to help us, and they become Muslim, and they say, come to Medina. When that is ready, he makes so there's strategic resilience, strategic alliances, strategic retreat then from Makkah to Medina. They come there and they do a strategic consolidation. They first unite Aus and Khazraj into a Muslim community called the Ansar. Then they unite the Muhajirun, the immigrants, with the Ansar, and they become the Muslim community. Then they go and they sign a treaty with the Jews and say, we're not fighting each other, we are one community, you will have freedom of faith. They even enter into an agreement with the mushriks, the idolaters, that listen, while we are here, we protect each other. So they create this platform to consolidate the community. Then Quraysh sends an army to Badr, and they fight, and they are victorious. In the same year, Rome defeats Persia again. And by that time, it's a few it's the year of deputations. Everyone hears about what has happened in Medina. And every government around there sends a delegation to Medina to look at this phenomenon and to learn about it and to see whether they can coexist or accept this deen. So, I mean, how can we be so unstrategic when we have an entire chapter like that? And maybe that is something for you, not to interrupt your salah, but to really reflect on the wonders of the Quran when we do Maghrib Salah, inshallah.
We're going to start.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. If I could continue, then maybe I should just summarize these last two slides, Surah Al-Fath and Surah Al-Rum, and there are many others, with a conclusion that there is no excuse for Muslims to act in unstrategic ways. We can't simply be high on principle, cunning on tactics, and be bereft or absent of strategy. And if there's anything that you must learn from the Quran, besides everything else, it is the centrality of strategy as a way for the Ummah to think its way out of trouble and to move forward harmoniously in this world. And so if I can put the lessons of what you have learned, is that in both the two that I have cited for you, the strategic goal in Surah Al-Fath was to re-enter Makkah as a safe and secure sanctuary for all religions, and in Surah Al-Rum was to have enough peace in Medina for the consolidation and the growth of the Muslim community after many years of sacrifice in Makkah. The critical outcomes that was needed on Hudaybiyah was a critical period of peace within which people can actually hear the message that you have. Because people cannot hear the message when their hearts are filled with fear and their minds are confused and they are feeling insecure. So you need sufficient peace for the message to sink in, and Hudaybiyah's treaty gave them that. And in Surah Al-Rum, there was suddenly the absence of two superpowers sucking everyone into war, so there was just enough peace to be able to move to Medina and consolidate it. The important outputs. The one output on Hudaybiyah was a treaty that the Muslims really, they stuck to the letter and the spirit of the treaty even when the others breached it. But they understood they will withstand that. So they needed a negotiated treaty there, and Surah Al-Rum, they needed a set of alliances in order to get to the conditions. And the crucial inputs was more at Hudaybiyah was to withhold yourself from war, to withhold yourself from anger, to withhold yourself from justified rage. And in Surah Al-Rum, it was to absorb the punishment, the torture, the humiliation in Makkah, to be resilient in the face of it while you wait for the moment when things were ready for a strategic retreat. Is anyone beginning to see some patterns about what our tasks are strategically? Okay? If it dawns on you, just put up your hand. Let's move on from there. And so that sketch put in different ways is what is commonly called an outcomes-based approach. We need to understand what is the long-term principal goal that a 7 million Muslim community has set for itself in the United States of America. And so the debate we had earlier, is it eventually we want to make America a Khilafat? Dr. Oda has given us those kind of things. Is it that we want to take over and make Sharia rule everywhere and all over? I think we have spoken about it as a code of ethics for us as individuals, and when we come to the mosque, as a way of observing our worship. But what we do want to have is that we want a greater synergy, a greater harmony between the maqasid, the objectives and the intents and the values and the ethical imperatives of our Sharia with the instruments that make up the Qanun in a place like America. We want to narrow the gap between the two. In South Africa, we said, what are the outcomes that we want from our transition from apartheid to democracy? And we said that we need to have, we called it in various ways, we said we want a Darul Salam, a place of peace, a Darul Aman, a place of security for everyone, a Darul Shahada, a place for the free profession of our mutual faiths. Some people even suggested a Darul Da'wah, a place where you can give the message in conditions of peace. And so we said in the medium to long term, that is something that is desirable, where you can pray, where you can observe your religion. And we went from the minimalist Imam Shafi, who said, wherever a Muslim can pray, there is the Darul Islam. And we took the words of Ibn Taymiyyah, who said that Allah's favor is on the non-Muslim ruler who is just, rather than on the Muslim ruler who is unjust. And therefore, there is no contradiction between Nelson Mandela becoming our president and us living there as Muslims. We asked, what are our strategic priorities? We understood that we needed to lay the foundations, build an institutional base like you're doing here at MAPS, and to be able to socialize our children into this religion, give them the education, the opportunities that they want, not only as Muslims, but generally. And therefore, what do we need to deliver? And so in much the same way that we deliver educational services, religious services, personal law services, charity to the whole community, outreach, joint campaigns to be part of this nation, and all in the short term, we need alliances. And I think that there is, from last night, clearly we need an anti-bigotry alliance, not just an anti-Islamophobia, not just an anti-racist, not just an anti-Semitic, anti-Semitic, and so forth. We need genuine principled alliances against all forms of bigotry, all forms of exclusion, all forms of inequality and injustice with other communities. And we need to divide our human and financial resources between our internal goals as Muslim and our external goals as citizens. So in South Africa, I don't want to go to this too much. Nelson Mandela led a successful transition, which people marvel about in the world. How did we stop bloodshed? How did we reconcile? How did we have an inclusive government? He kept his eye on a free, just and democratic South Africa. He never promised anyone an Islamic state or anything like that. And so we agree that that was what we needed as Muslims. It was not just consistent with our values, it was also in our interests. And therefore, he wanted unity and peace, And he wanted stable change. On stable change, we said to ourselves, we don't want to destroy what we need to inherit. And we also understood we need unity, because our colonialists have no other country to go to. They are here to stay. So if we're going to coexist, it may as well be peaceful. And therefore, for example, the tactics that he used, he provided sunset clauses. So I don't want to go into too much of the political philosophy, but he said basically, white judges, white army generals and so forth, you can keep your jobs for 5 years, we won't touch your pensions, buy into it and you may stay on longer, and so forth, but we're now going to start doing, because he understood, unlike many in the Arab Spring, understood that the main priority was to avoid counter-revolution. You can go to a glorious death with your principles, or you can be around 10, 20 years later and build towards your objectives and your principles. But we needed also to understand that wrong things happened in the past, and therefore we had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It wasn't a Reconciliation Commission because we don't want to paper over injustice, but I just wanted to show you that everything that I've shown you before is possible, and that we have had the good fortune of trying some of these things out in South Africa, and it's more than theory. So leadership, and this is why Dr. Oda, Dr. Abadi and myself, we do some of these things. We are not trying to change the entire ummah, but we are trying to recruit a few tugboats, small little ships that are all engine. It can pull 10 times its weight. It can push 10 times its weight. It can steer 10 times its weight, because it's all engine. It can make sharp turns within a few meters. It can gain speed within a few meters. It can stop within a few meters. The ummah is like this tanker. It takes miles before it can change course. It needs lots of clear sea before it can even think of changing a degree or two. And therefore, our objective with you is to turn MAPS, leadership as you're sitting here, into the most powerful tugboat that can nudge the ummah into the kind of strategic direction that it requires, that can deliver the kind of defeat to the extremists, that can cause a reform of the orthodoxy without destroying it. It nudges until we, not nudges, I should find a different word. Nudges means the excrement. It taps it until you get it into a better direction. And so we're going to need different leadership types that's going to be able to do it, but I'm not going to spend much time on that. But I do want to spend a little bit of time on this, because in times of uncertainty and times of crisis, there are four kinds of leaders that emerge. The vertical axis is between those who lead by values and those who lead by rules. And so what happens when leaders encounter new situations, unprecedented situations, crisis situations, uncertain situations? Those, for example, who have a memory of great values, oh, when we were homogeneous and we were loving each other and so forth, and they encounter the new, they effectively think of the past and they want to recreate the past. And so that's nostalgic leadership. If only we can have the Prophet amongst us. If only Abu Bakr, not Baghdadi, but Ibn Siddiq, if only he can be with us here today, we can show them. And that's a lot of the Salafi instinct. Returning to the cradle of Medina, when things were pure, uncontaminated by all this technology and different people who are all around, and we were fewer but better. That's nostalgic leadership. And you must test where you are on that matrix. Then there are those who, when they encounter the new, they see themselves only as forcing rules on people. That's demagogic leadership. That's what I think the US is going through right now. It's people who say, not let us be more multicultural. Say, no, build a wall. Let's not become more accepting and make peace by no. Ban Muslims. Get a register. No, let's not do this, that, and the other. You see, they think they can legislate their way out of the crisis. And that's demagogic leadership. And that's what's sweeping the first world at this moment, when they encounter all these new people, new situations, new economies, and so forth. Then there are those who only know rules, and when they encounter new, they give bureaucratic leadership, managerial leadership. Yeah, let's do A, B, C, D. And we have those in our committees, and so forth. And they're necessary, because someone has to look at the accounts, and someone has to look at this, and someone has to prescribe what needs to be done. And then you get those that we are trying to create here. When they encounter the new, they draw on their values, and they set out a strategic path forward. They see around the corner. They anticipate, they analyze. They can say, now if they play chess, not drafts or dominoes. When your opponent puts down a 6, you've got to put down a 6. No, they play chess. Because the objective is the king. And so, we need to understand what leadership we want to offer if we are to become the tugboat. And so, that leadership that we're looking for, it's leadership that can distinguish between tame problems and wicked problems. Tame problems are complicated, but we've seen it before. Wicked problems is, hell, this is unprecedented. We haven't seen this before. It's complex. Not complicated, like in tame problems, but wicked, like in complex problems. Tame problems are resolvable because the number of unknowns are few. Wicked problems are intractable because there's no known formula. That's the situation I think we're moving into. Tame problems you can harmonize through good management. Okay, win-win. Let's get a win-win. What do you need to win? What do you need to win? Okay, I give you half of what you need and I give you half of what you need. Listen, there's the problem, we've harmonized it. This one says, no. We can't harmonize, we've got to trade off. We have a budget of 50,000. We can either build a new minaret or we can build a classroom. Not a classroom with half a minaret. That's harmonizing. This is saying, okay, listen, strategically we need that classroom. The minaret can wait. We let Haider stand on top and wear a kufiya. So again, I think we're not giving you answers to the questions that you have. We are trying to give you new thoughts, shock you with the reality out there, and then say to you, what leadership are you capable of? And so you've got to decide, where are you spending all your time? I mean, you can either remain in the crisis corner, you just give leadership because there's a crisis now, or in the urgent corner, let's quickly do this, we've got a deadline tomorrow. Or you can move to the important corner, listen, this thing is coming up in 2 weeks' time, let's plan now already. Or in the proactive corner, listen, I think 6 months from now, Trump will be in there and he's going to start thinking about this register and so forth. And so can we now start reaching out? Because if we reach out 6 months when it does do the register, we are going to be opportunistic. And the Christians and the Jews who came here that night when Justice Oda spoke, they said, we didn't hear from you for 6 months, now we hear from you again because there's a register tomorrow. You see, if you're proactive, you will do it now. 6 months from now, it will be a crisis. 5 months from now, it will be urgent. 3 months from now, it will be important. So it's really doing first things first. Sequence your actions so that preferably you operate there. You can't avoid the other three, but that's where you've got to spend, I don't know, either 50% of your time, maybe another 25% there, maybe 15% there, inshallah 5% there. Does that add up to 100, Yasser, with your math that you did that in one of your courses?
I never adds up. Usually 90% on the urgent. It's on Islamic organizations.
Yeah, I know. And when leadership then knows, you know, the zone of control, the things that we have direct control over, it's inside and small. Then this is our zone of influence. And so victims are here. Me, myself, I. Let's go into the mosque. Ya Allah, let's make dua. This Trump is getting phenomenal now. Let's get into the mosque. So you go into your zone of control, where you can give the adhan on time, pray, recite beautifully, and that's important. But you must extend from your zone of control to your zone of influence. And that is building coalitions. It's reaching out. This is reaching in. This is reaching out. So that you make the alliance proactively, the coalitions proactively. You create a principle rather than a tactical, urgent thing. And your zone of inspiration, you've got to communicate more. You don't go silent. Our tendency sometimes in a crisis is to go silent. Whereas you've got to inspire people with who you are, with what you do, with your importance to society, and the beauty of your message, and the distinction that you have from the Daesh people, etc., etc. So I think that it's very important that we understand some of those things. And therefore, Marcel Proust once said that the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. We all want new landscapes, but very few of us are prepared to change our eyes. And I think that the difference is that landscapes is to try and find another imam to give us a better fatwa. New eyes is taking what Sheikh Jasser has said and applying that to your reading of the Quran, because you can't shop around for fatwas. So you've got to have new eyes. And so what do new eyes see? That the Maqasid approach is rooted in Islam. It's necessary to confront new and unlimited events, which shifts us from preservations to rights. The strategic middle, we need to get it. And that the middle is the default position of the ummah, ummatan wasatan. Be aware of the end and then plan back. Where do you see yourself in 20 years' time? And therefore, what happens in year 20? What happens in year 19? What happens in year 15? What happens in year 12? What happens in year 1? And work that way. And so, we've already spoken about that leadership thing. And so, in a real sense, if we can achieve anything in this process with you, is that we want to inculcate in you a Maqasidi approach, both as an understanding of Islam, as a set of conceptual tools that you have, as a strategic ability that you have, and a way of interpreting our faith, and let that wheel turn, and that you allow yourself to be turned by that wheel, and in turn act as a tugboat that turns the bigger wheel, that is your community and the ummah. And so, in a sense, unlike what Daesh wants in Dabiq, eliminating the grey zone, we say the grey is a lovely place. Don't be afraid of the grey. Uncertainty has been, there are a few black and whites, and they're mostly in the domain of Aqidah, and they're mostly in the domain of Ibadah, in belief and in worship. We are not here to change the way you believe and the way in which you pray and the fast and all of those kind of things. I think that it's in recognition that the world has changed that we look at how Maqasid al Syaria can be able to give us a new way of confronting the mu'amalat, the worldly matters, our relationships with others, our living together. And so if you accept the kind of model that I think we've accepted in South Africa as Dar Shahada, place of free profession, of safety, security, peace for Muslims and so forth, then there's a few things. Then, as I've said before, integration is the better model, rather than say assimilation, becoming the same, or isolation, or communitarianism, where your community wants to be exceptional and you don't want to be part of the rest of society. You just want a bit of real estate to do what you want to do anyway. Speak your own language, eat your own food, pray your own prayers, with no citizenship. Integration gives us the possibility of being Muslim and being citizens. And so, for example, we then learned in South Africa from that model to live with multiple identities. And so, Nelson Mandela said, do you want to be Muslims and South Africans? We said, yes, of course. He said, is Muslim going to be the noun or the adjective? We said, no, our belief is very important, make it a noun. The naming word for those who don't know grammar. Make it the noun. And so we said, yeah, we're Muslim. So South Africa is then the adjective. Yes, so we are South African Muslims. Then you can put little qualifiers at the end. I'm a South African Muslim of Malay origin. And if I stay here long enough, I could be a South African Muslim of Malay origin who support the Seahawks, if they can just get to the finals. That then brings us to the issue of minimum and maximum. Because we must really sometimes wonder, and I think that the question answer session with Dr. Oda was just so fascinating, about women and about this and about that. Because we try to deal with this minimum maximum thing. And to explain it, what do you need to be compliant minimally with your obligations to God, and what would be the conditions that would want to give you maximum expression of your faith? And so I'm very worried in South Africa, because we negotiated a thing where minimum compliance meant that the objective of our dress was modesty. That we said, okay, the scarf or the hijab was important for minimum compliance, but now people are riding a bus through it and they're going for maximum expression because the number of niqabs is going, and I'm sure that soon we are going to have a situation where they are going to say, listen, we can't have this anymore at the airport. It just takes one bomb blast to blow the myth. I mean, we got away with a bit more in South Africa. We wanted at minimum halal meat, then they gave us half an abattoir, and now we want the halal park. So we want to go from minimum compliance to maximum expression, and so we can really go. And I mean, some Muslims are becoming unscrupulous. We had a minimum thing where 12:30, the schools let their Muslim children go to Jumu'ah, the work lets them go, and then the next thing, some people who go, they say, okay, now I'm not going back to work. Now they're getting so rude that they don't want to go and work at all on a Friday. So they're moving from minimum expression to minimum compliance to maximum expression. And I think if you don't watch these things, these are not things that must happen by accident. A community must plan around how it deals with those kind of things. And then, of course, the issue of consistency. What you want for yourself, you must give to others. It has two applications. If there are certain rights you want for yourself, you must be able to share that with your neighbors. And for us, the challenge was, and particularly for me as Governor of the Western Cape, when, for example, the issue of civil unions came up. Not marriages, but contracts between homosexual couples. We could have had a situation in which we said, no, we want our marriages recognized as Muslims and so forth, but we don't want their contracts recognized. Tomorrow there will be a government who loves gays and hates Muslims. They say, no, you remember that thing? You made our constitution arbitrary. So we are now going to invert it. We are going to give them marriage rights, and don't you come, you go to court. And you do whatever, there's no special favor for you. When you start making things arbitrary, Nelson Mandela called any government elected by a majority, he called it a temporary majority. Because they're only a majority until the next election. And therefore you must never make laws for a temporary majority. You must make laws based on permanent values. And then secondly, I remember my advice when the Muslims of New York were fighting for the so-called 911 mosque. And Imam Faisal was trying to explain, this is not near 911, it's a musalla, and this, that, and the other. And I said, the best way to campaign for a mosque in New York is to campaign for a church in Saudi Arabia. No one will question your sincerity. But we carry these ambiguities about us, and we can't speak about it because we don't want to wash dirty linen. But for as long as we don't wash dirty linen, who will trust us and believe us? So my conclusion is, this is where we are. This is where we need to be. And it's going to really take an enormous amount of hard work. So in the remaining, I hopefully we can do 20 minutes of this. You must please stay because all the certificates are ready to be handed out to you. But are there any questions, comments, challenges and disagreements? Whatever you want to do of those four, do it quickly and shortly, inshallah.
Where have you sought to implement this design before, and how does it work, and what were some of the problems?
That's a difficult question. Let's take a few more. Any other? Please.
Well, the question is, where do we begin? I guess I do get to, some non-Muslims support me, and then how can we help? So what should I tell them? What's the first thing that you get more bang for the buck, basically, if you get help for such requests?
Let's take a third one.
I have a follow-up to that.
Yes, please.
Not just non-Muslims, but within a Muslim community, how do we bring other groups within a Muslim community who may not focus on the inside circle like you showed, right? Which is all about prayer and thing. How do we get them motivated to engage in this broader discussion? How do we bring this value to that, right?
Okay, on the first question, let me say that this is largely the evolution, I think, of a Muslim community in Cape Town. 350 years old. I don't want to repeat the story, I'll just use some key words. Brought there as slaves, religion banned for a century, the religion proscribed for the rest of it, and we suddenly free in 1994, but we had good leadership throughout the apartheid years. Muslims were being seduced to join the white establishment, and we had enough leaders to say, no. Our values of justice means that we will reach out to the black majority, even if it means we don't get the kind of comforts that they were promising us. So it starts off with the idea of strategic resilience, to choose your long-term path and then be resilient to absorb the blows in it. I mean, and I tell the story, very few people know, everyone knows that Nelson Mandela was in prison for 27 years. Very few people know that in the cell right next to him for 26 years was Ahmad Kathrada. Everyone knows that Steve Biko was tortured to death. Very few people know that Imam Abdullah Harun was similarly tortured to death in 1969. And so the point that I'm making is that very early on, you've got to choose a side. And it is not a side that is simply opportunistic, it's a side that is principled. You may play tactical games within it, but not principled games within it. And wallahi, everyone breathed a sigh of relief, even those who wanted to choose the white establishment and who came up with all kinds of reasons. They even said, yeah, but Musa went to speak to Fir'aun. He even advised Fir'aun, why didn't we do that? And we remained fairly principled about that, but tactical in it. And so, 94, Nelson Mandela is elected president. We almost fall off our chairs when 9 of his cabinet ministers were Muslim. The Minister of Justice, and so forth and so forth. That we get the kind of things that creates the Daru Shahada, the abode, the shared abode, and so forth. To the extent that I think we're beginning to reap the problems of it, because some people are taking advantage and using the free space to now begin to do hate speech and intolerant language and tie up women in their homes, etc., etc. So what I want to say is that that's the model that we have had, but I think complacency and too much freedom is getting some generations to forget how hard fought it was. The second question, where do we begin? I think that I made a joke after Jummah with Haider yesterday. We were debating whether my khutbah was too harsh. And I said, Haider, whatever it is, don't let a good crisis go to waste. We are in a moment of crisis. You may not feel it in Seattle and Redmond, but the whole world is experiencing this crisis. And when the wrong people rejoice for your leader, you must be more worried. Assad rejoiced. Sisi rejoiced. And so we can go on to find who Mugabe rejoiced. And so you shall know them by their rejoicers. So the point is that we mustn't be alarmist, but it gives us the opportunity to be proactive now. And this crisis is a moment that focuses the mind. Now is the time to say, what do we envision for a future America? If our children's children must live here, what kind of America must they live in? You've got to first dream. And once you've fixed your dreams, you've got to say, now how do we get there? And then work down that outcomes-based approach and say, then what are the key outcomes? If that's the strategic goal and principal goal, what's that? And then somewhere along that, very early on, like I would say, I was telling Haider, I would say to you, within a month, before there is even an inauguration, I would say that Washington State, Redmond, Seattle, or just Redmond must be able to convene a summit to launch a coalition